Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes? In the back, can you hear me? All right. Louder? Better?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. I'm Sandy Lee. I teach in the English department, creative writing and poetry. And just a couple things to say before we get going. At the end of the reading, our poet, Leslie Sainz, will be happy to take questions. And I'll ask you to speak those loud so that everybody can hear. And then after our Q&A, we'll have a book sale and signing in the back. So I'd like to introduce Lily Vernon. Lily is a creative writing major who will be introducing our poet for us. Please welcome Lily.
Welcome all to this event in Berry College's English, Rhetoric, and Writing reading series. Tonight's reading is sponsored by the Georgia Poetry Circuit, a consortium of colleges and universities across the state, and Berry College. I'm honored to introduce to you Leslie Sainz. The daughter of Cuban exiles, Leslie Sainz is the author of Have You Been Long Enough at the Table, published by Tin House in 2023, and her work has appeared in the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day, the Yale Review, Kenyon Review, American Poetry Review, and elsewhere. She is a finalist for the Poetry Society of America's Norma Carter First Book Award, the New England Book Award, and the Vermont Book Award, and winner of the 2024 Audre Lorde Award. She has received fellowships, scholarships, and honors from the National Endowment for the Arts, Contamundo, the Miami Writers Institute, the Adroit Journal, and the Stadler Center for Poetry and Literary Arts at Buffalo University. A former guest host of the award-winning podcast The Slow Down, she currently works as the managing editor of New England Review and teaches in the Newport MFA program at Salvadoran University. Have You Been Long Enough at the Table explores the question of how to navigate a literary world where the most esteemed words of agriculture have already been written and commemorated by those entirely antithetical to your struggle. Named after a line of dialogue from The Old Man and the Sea, Have You Been Long Enough at the Table stands in opposition to the culture of hegemonic masculinity and represents hope for the emancipation of Cuban women from the perspective of Cuban American family and feminine tradition. Her incredible range and diversity throughout the collection, which includes sonnets, prose poetry, and many more gems of experimental style, drives its overarching theme of displacement and eclectic identity. And though it's been said the title indicates a lack, this collection has so much to discover in and between each and every one of its lines. It is our great privilege to have the opportunity to listen to her this evening. Please welcome Leslie Sainz.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay, good. Hi, everyone. Wow. Lily, thank you so much for that. That was a lovely introduction. And I know you were already filming it, but I filmed it too. So now I have it for my personal record. It's such an honor to be here at Berry. I mean, what an institution. You have so much land and so many pretty buildings. And I love all your cows. And I love everyone that I've met today, truly. So thank you to Sandy and Sam and Clint and all the students that I met with today. Thank you, Lily, again for that introduction. Thank you, Bailey, for helping set all of this up. I mean, I could go on and on. The Georgia Poetry Circuit is a lot of fun, and you were catching me pretty early in the cycle, which means I'm still animated, and I still think my jokes are funny, so please laugh at them. Otherwise, I will feel really sad. So I'm going to read some poems from Have You Been Long Enough at the Table, which is a quick summary. I think, again, Lily did such a fantastic job, but basically there's 3 symmetrical sections in which we follow a primary speaker who is queer and Cuban American, and is basically going through a series of careful unlearnings or they divorce themselves from their parents' conservative political ideology and figure out who they are. So yeah, I'm going to start by reading the first poem in the collection, which is titled Neo, and it's a frontispiece, which is a fun way of saying it's a poem that appears before the first section. So it appears before everything else and is meant to illuminate the rest of the collection. And this has a dedication to Los Balseros. And Los Balseros are the Cuban boat people who risk their lives on makeshift rafts, hoping to make it to the southernmost point of the United States, which is about a 90-mile journey. And the primary Balsero crisis, the Cuban exodus, took place around 1994, although actually last year we saw a record number of Cuban migrants that is actually rivaling the 90s crisis. So yeah, you know, just one of the many poly crises of our time. So this is Neo, para los Balseros. There is no country where the dead don't float. Men and children going, having gone, lung wet across thickened water. Be it the body to know what's missing, to call back the colors. At sea, the stomach is a bugle, though I've heard it called a scream. Oil drums, headless as monarchs, styrofoam on the knees, said of regimes, under or over, here or there. The orchids are lovely this time of year, and the women writing. What covers the land, and is the land, much in us still. Feel free to do whatever you like in response to the poems. You can snap, you can clap, you can go, which is very popular in poetry reading. I am very guilty of the or you can be completely silent, whatever feels good to you. I think next I'll read actually the next two poems. So there's a series of American sonnets in the collection, which for those who aren't familiar, American sonnets are the laziest sonnets because they're basically just 14 lines. You don't need to follow any meter or rhyme. You have 14 lines, you can just say it's an American sonnet. But these are American sonnets written for and alongside the Orishas of Santeria, the Afro-Cuban religion. And the first, I'll read the first and the last sonnet over the course of the reading, but the first sonnet is for Elegua. And Elegua, in the faith tradition of Santeria, you have to talk to Elegua before you can talk to any of the other Orishas, which is why it's technically the first poem after the frontispiece. And Elegua represents roads, doors, destiny, very important figure. So this is sonnet for Elegua. In pursuit of an ending, I quickened my pace. I had no questions, not my own, to recovering. The only certainty, the evening under the oil palm when you gave me my dry feet. From then on, dreams as warm as atoms. The exiled boy, always desperate to be heard, appeared mostly as crickets and hinges. 3 summers ago, he mutilated a pigeon by hurling it against the wall of the market. It made sounds like the latch rattle of an icebox, and the stain never came out, even when we used aguardiente. I've left my outline in worse places, lately by the window, where I count the women with thicker, blacker hair, study the way it tightens around their shoulders like bowls ascending. What occupies me is also running. It never tires, but rather repositions itself. I should like to reposition myself, please. All of me this time. So, growing up, my father was undocumented, and that meant that anytime there was a knock on the door, we freaked out. To this day, I'm still very shaky when I hear a knock on the door. It brings back a lot of triggering memories. So I figured I'd write about it, what to do with this trauma other than make art out of it, I guess. Otherwise, it's kind of useless. And this poem is very sonically driven. I promised Bailey that I would read it, so I'm going to read it. And I'm going to do some pounding at the pulpit, so just a warning, because it's going to be intense maybe. We're in this grand space, by the way, which I haven't yet really acknowledged. This is amazing. I'm also going to take a sip of water to prepare, because again, this is a more active poem, let's say. Excuse me. So this is Notice to Appear. It goes doorbell 2 beats, then knocking 3 or more beats, or knocking 5 beats, then doorbell 3 times, 2 beats each. The very first beat disappears the front door. We abrupt, any way possible, silence. Beat, beat, then beat, 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 beat. We crawl to mother and father's closet, staying close to the ground. Together, we have 4 pairs of legs. I am short and young enough already not to be seen, and brother is taller and growing. Beat, 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 beat. Our hearts, 4, are summoned into this beating, so the sound of heavy listening. Mother heavy listens best. Our hearts, 4, are so impressionable. Our ears, 8, are so airless and impressionable. Beat, beat. In the closet, we crouch on top of each other, father's disappearance that close, and look like more legs. Beat, 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 beat. The house black and white. Brother and I heavy listen to mother, looking at father as though he is her husband only. Our impressionable hearts, 2, our airless ears, 4, beat, 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 beat. On the property's perimeter, legs, 2, with large feet in boots. On the patio, that sound, that close. Thank you. Yeah, you really need to stop because my hand hurts now. So, give me some love. Okay, so the next poem I'm going to read is titled Glassware, and all of these so far have been in the first section. And this next poem is kind of where the speaker really starts to notice that their parents are sort of transfixed by Fox News. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Mike Lindell, the guy from My Pillow, who sells, now he's selling the crosses that he always wears, and I think he's selling my towels, so he's really got a business venture. Anyway, I'm going to subtle, maybe not so subtle reference to him here. Glassware. 1. Overhearing an argument, something beneath my cheeks like heat, like cowbells. I am at my most probable, most liquid suddenly. I come when called. 2. Over dinner, a man, melting, sells American pillows through the television. The napkins are of a thick paper. The dishware, all rounded, the color of most bandages. I am impressed by my convincing father and loyal mother. Their face veins make clear they are not lying to themselves, not themselves. Faithfully, I am a large shard made of their smaller shards. If you were to turn my ears inside out, hot skin, sleep, only trust your family. 3. My father used to blow glass in California, sell plated jewelry from a dark gray suitcase, have regrets. My mother worked for Eastern Airlines and ate very little. Now, my mother lives alone and with my father in Miami. My father lives with my mother and some days himself. For when I am hurt, my sorry skull vibrates, needs sleep. I was barefoot when glass appeared on the floor. This time, most times, rage to keep it company. When no one apologizes, my eyes roll out of my head as packets of fake sugar. 5. Shortly after the revolution, children, students, worked the sugarcane fields. I hear this because it is told to me in the kitchen by my hurt parents. In 1964, a 12-year-old boy named Arnaldo Carrillo was said to have cut 7,608 pounds of cane a day. Fidel holds still the record, 9,230 pounds. 6. Sugar appears in many American fantasies. The convincing 60s sugar glass made to simulate broken windows and windshields. I will never taste it. It doesn't harm the actor, it harms the actor, argues the internet. Transparent, brittle sugar. When I study the 60s, other time periods, my eyes turn red like from cameras, or rum, or furnaces, or sand. All right, so now we're moving into section 2, and this is where I think the speaker starts to, I don't know, come into themselves a little bit, develop outside of the family unit. Excuse me. So the next poem I'm going to read is dedicated to the memory of Elena Milagro de Hoyos, which most people aren't familiar with. My mother really loves watching the smut of the History Channel. Like she loves like ancient aliens and like ancient or like haunted locations, that sort of thing. And she was watching a haunted locations spin-off, and I think it was focused on Key West. And that's how I learned about Elena Milagro de Hoyos. So essentially, she was a young Cuban-American woman who emigrated with her family, her parents and her 2 sisters, to Key West. Her parents worked in a cigar factory, and she became something of a local celebrity in the area because she was just so beautiful. People would literally stop her on the street to take her photograph or to take a photograph of her. She was also known for having a beautiful singing voice. She gets married quite young, I think around 16. She miscarries a child, and then by age 21, she contracts tuberculosis. And then some creepy dude gets involved. He was like 56 at the time, a German immigrant by the name of Karl Tanzler. He poses as a medical doctor to take care of Elena, but obviously he can't cure her. But he becomes very obsessed with her. And so she passes, and I won't tell you what happens next, but let's just say that she was violated post-mortem in many different ways. And when the story eventually broke and people found out what he did, it was spun as some sort of love story. So not only was she failed by science and by this man, but also by her community, because afterwards they had like a public viewing of her body and what had been done to her body. So it was very, very grim, very depressing, very tragic and violent. If you Google her name, all you will see in the image search is what happened to her and not who she was as she lived her life. So this story has haunted me for many, many years, and to write about it, and instead of writing about her, which would feel kind of cheap and perhaps exploitative in a way, I decided to write to her. So in the epistolary tradition, sort of like a letter stretching across time. That's a lot of preamble. Thank you for staying with me. So this is at the center of the story and utterly left out. Para Elena Milagro de Hoyos. I thoughts. All any of us have. I'm having the thought, it's too late in my life to stop crying. Elena, can we practice this? I notice I'm having the thought, it's too late in my life to stop crying. There are things beyond belief, like garlic, like we have the same wrists. How did you place yours when you sang, sweetly? Elena, yesterday I saw the reddest fire hydrant imaginable. It wasn't beyond belief, but I was startled. That kind of red should only exist inside of us, I think. I wish neither of us could recognize that color. Do you believe we want enough of ourselves? Once a week I walk to the same construction site a mile away from my home. I kick one rock out of formation from a larger pile of rocks. No one sees me. No men have punished me. Elena, I'm saying no men have punished me because of these walks. Rudolph Valentino, did you know he was nearsighted? Elena, your favorite actor was nearsighted. I feel quite unreal, he said once, maybe twice, into a beautiful microphone. You and I, the difference between us. I look severe. I don't like having my picture taken. I just don't. I had the nightmare again about choking on a bay leaf. Real fear like girls are real. In real life, it happens most when someone else has served you. Elena, on accident and not, when have you ignored the dangers? Elena, they were wrong. Elena, our mothers were wrong about kindness. Thank you. Let's see, where should we go next? How are we feeling? Still awake? Still okay? All right. You ready for me to roast my mom and dad? I need water for this. All right. So this is the first poem of the third section where I'm really just like, guns a-blazing, hey, angst, it's all there. So this poem is called Self-Determination Theory, and it has an epigraph from Gertrude Stein that reads, "There is something in this native land business, and you cannot get away from it." Self-Determination Theory. I sit in the living room. In the living room, my mother chokes on something cold and sharp. I launch an investigation. She is wearing a blue cotton shirt. Her shoulders are showing. The television is hush. I conclude she is struggling with a unique idea, one she should keep. Just like that, sparks, reds, whites. It is the savior mother calls U.S. U.S. places his arms around her abdomen and applies sudden upward pressure. She heaves. The volume of the Not News channel rises, and the sound alerts my father in the kitchen. To enter the living room, my father must step over the bodies of other Spanish-speaking men. He does so with ease. I weep in the living room, In the living room, my father watches US grope my mother, and though he is a jealous man, he says nothing, because he too accepts no other touch. Yeah, my parents really love America. I mean, I don't know, we can talk about it later. This is like the sort of angsty kid in me, but I kind of want to read a poem that has fuck in it in a chapel. I don't know. That's not as cool as I thought, but I'm going to try it. Because I like the poem. What was that?
God smiles on the fuck.
There you go. I think so. So this poem is called Propaganda Ghazal, and the ghazal is a beautiful Persian traditional form that's written in couplets. It should be at least 6 couplets. And in the first couplet, the last word of the first and second line are the same word. And then in every other couplet, that word is the last line. It's the last word of the second line. Maybe you can picture it. If not, that's fine. You can buy the book and then you can see what it looks like. So this is Propaganda Ghazal. Father repeats a Yankee saying about history, its wrong side. In fear of comeuppance, I eat so much I can only sleep on my side. For years, I thought our guts looked like unholstered chairs, that this unlearning would be a larger spectacle, a bright side. America, wake up. The bazooka blasts are cartoon tomatoes. I line up the lies like hand-holding children, side by side by side. Fidel Castro is a threat to the peace of the Western Hemisphere. For an eye-catching poster, use the color wheel's opposite sides. I didn't fuck the woman with the Che Guevara print above her bed. Instead, I let her pin new atrocities to my damp right side. So maybe one more? Does that sound good to us? Yeah? Okay. So I will read, as promised, the last sonnet in the book, and that is the penultimate poem, so the second to last poem in the book. And this is sonnet for Oshun, and Oshun represents the island of Cuba, femininity, fertility, rivers, sunflowers, kind of like everything pleasurable, one could say. And I should mention to you that these sonnets are not necessarily, they're not prayers, they're not incantations, they're not like, summoning spells. They're more so to indicate a kind of intimacy between deity and man. And so the primary speaker talks to them as if they are sort of a living manifestation of a diary in a lot of ways. So this is Sonnet for Oshun. After my left arm, I washed my right, neck, décolletage, and navel. I ate ground meat with large crystals of imported salt. The women and men who would stroke my hair if I asked, I thought of them fondly, then sadly. At the flea market, what I touched with a fingernail was a copper lamp, a mundane painting of mountains. The cashier's hum. I bought nothing I didn't want. In the cul-de-sac, I found clouds on leashes, loose roosters. I thought thoughts ugly as clothespins. Reading a used book, I suspected I knew less about death than the last person who held it. I spat into a mirrored sink. I lost my slippers and face. To feel more like water, I drank it. Before bed, I walked my plank of uncertainties and plunged further into uncertainty. Am I capturing all of history in this gesture? I shouted into the future. In the wet air of the future, I could have, but never appeared. No one was sorry but me. Thank you so much.
About 15 minutes for questions. Has a question?
Can you talk at all about the choices behind the cover that you chose for this book?
Choices behind the cover? Is that you, Nicole? Okay. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on, but I feel like I can make you out. So covers for books are really interesting because it really varies how much autonomy you have and authority you have on the cover. So I didn't get final say in the cover. The distributor of this book, which is W.W. Norton, has technically final say, but the Tin House team was extraordinary to work with. And so Beth Steidel, who does all of their covers, and she's brilliant, sent, I think, like 6 options originally. And I have to be honest, I hated all of them. I was shocked. I was like, oh my God, no, we are seeing this book completely differently. And because I'm that kind of person, I had already made like a secret hidden Pinterest board with the inspiration of like what I wanted it to look like. And so I talked to my editor and I was like, would it be okay if I pass this on? And normally as part of the design process, you'll get like a author questionnaire and it should have a section around like covers. So I did put together originally like a Google Doc that had, I think, like 6 comp covers, so examples of recent covers in the past 5 years that I really liked. And I thought that it was like so obvious what my taste was through those 6, and then I realized a designer is going to pick up on different facets of those designs, and so they're not in my head. But I sent Beth the Pinterest board, and she totally got it from there. And there were a couple versions that had the sort of like ominous black and white jagged cliff thing happening here. And this one just called to me. I loved how stark it was. I love that the photograph, you're kind of like half submerged according to the foreground and where the eye goes. I love that there's like a really small little boat in the corner. And perhaps more excitedly, I don't actually know where this is. This is not Cuba that I know. So yeah, I'm kind of intrigued by the mystery of it. So this came out and I was like, that's the one. So I felt very lucky actually that I was able to go through multiple rounds and land on something that I felt really represented the book as I see it. Thank you. Yes, Bailey.
So you talked about how a lot of your poetry, or at least to our class, a lot of the poetry is less of you have a form or you have words in mind, but you have a concrete idea that you want to get across. How do you come up with those ideas, or like are there certain like subject matters that you feel like you're drawn to that bring you ideas or certain things like that?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends. I mean, when I'm kind of stuck, I love to write ekphrastically. So for those who aren't familiar, ekphrasis is Greek for to describe. And an ekphrastic work is a piece of art that reacts to an existing piece of art. So for example, I'll look up like a painting or a sculpture and I'll just write a poem in response to it. And good, successful ekphrastic work doesn't simply summarize the original piece of art, but rather it complicates it in some way. It expands upon its ideas or its images. And so I like writing fast and because then I don't actually have to have an idea in mind. I get to work off of something that's already in the world and that has already triggered some kind of emotional response in me. But I also do it to music. Like sometimes I'll just put on something that doesn't have any words, whether it's classical or like, you know, like, I don't know, just like noise. And that's a fun exercise. But I get ideas from everywhere, you know? I mean, I think one of my favorite poets and writers is Renee Gladman. And she has this book called Calamities. And in it she writes, poetry comes out of nothing, read the nothing. And that has always stayed with me in that, yeah, we make this up, you know? I'm also reminded of the poet Jack Gilbert, who basically said that, not that like aliens helped him write his poems, but just the idea that like he is a receptor and there's like an antenna up here and he is not in control of what comes in. He simply is the messenger. He transcribes what he receives. And that has felt very true to me in terms of my process. But you know, you do things as an author, as a professional writer to help that process along. So, you know, I write notes down on my phone all the time. Maybe I'm just out and about and I overhear or mishear something that someone says to someone else, and I find that a fascinating interaction. So I document it in my notebook or in my phone, or I'm walking around and I see, you know, like a dead bird that just crashed into a glass window. And I'm like, oh God, I'm in my feelings about this bird, and you know, all of a sudden I'm jotting down the image of that. So yeah, I think it's helpful to keep as much language that excites you near you, but there are other ways to generate it. It comes out of nothing, but you get to study the nothing. Yeah. Yeah, same.
So I'm hearing you talk about the way you can find like inspiration just existing in the world, but you also mentioned earlier today that you did a lot of archival research for this book. Could you talk a little bit about that, like in more scholarly, like intentional approach to inspiration?
For sure. So as far as scholarly research work, I have to say I'm the world's worst researcher. Like when it came time to put together the notes section of the book, I was like, oh God, I have to reverse engineer some of these poems because I didn't always document where I got something from. Don't be like me. Write down your sources. Be ethical. And I was able to do it, I promise. The notes section is quite extensive. So, but I think, you know, I would say I engage with a lot of primary source material, a lot of photographs. So photographs of Cuban migrants taken by the Associated Press, or there's a Cuban photojournalist named Lisette Poole, so I engage with her work quite a bit. Probably most pronouncedly, there's a poem in the collection that engages with declassified documents from dated March 1964, so under the Kennedy administration, documenting Operation Northwoods and Operation Mongoose. So I did research on that. Trying to think of what else came. Because it kind of goes through Cuban history even to the present, there's a poem that documents the 2021 July protests on the island in response to a lack of resources on the island with COVID, and also a response to the government cracking down on free expression and protest and all of that. So, I mean, I look a lot at photographs. I would say that's probably my primary focus. I think too, I mean, I did some oral history collection too, in terms of I interviewed both of my parents individually, just to get a sense of their journey. So my dad left Cuba in 1956. He was, I think, 2 years old. And he grew up in Brazil. My mother left Cuba in 1961. She was 4 years old, and she ended up growing up in Jamaica. So they kind of served as primary sources for their own lives. But then I did other research. So I would say there are two scholarly texts that I owe a great deal to. One of them is Lydia Cabrera's El Monte, which translates to the wilderness. And she is a famous anthropologist who documented the faith traditions of the Black and Creole people of Cuba. So that's where all of the kind of foundational Santeria knowledge comes from. And then also Ada Ferrer's Cuba and American History, which won the Pulitzer Prize a few years ago, that traces, again, Cuba's relationship with the United States from colonization to present day. And that really just blew the doors wide open for me. Because again, I think I felt as though I was working at a disadvantage when I attempted to approach history, and that I was kind of indoctrinated with a very specific lens of history through my parents, and their recollections are, subject to their political affiliation, to their memory, to their egos, like all of those. I think their memory, that's accuracy, I think, is subservient to those other facets. So it was kind of an amalgamation of all those different sources that helped buffer the collection. Yeah.
I was wondering, how much do you write? And I think how much you actually made this time. I mean, how much you generally what you want?
Yeah, so the question is, how much did I write for it? How much did I cut from it? I have to say, there weren't. And I'm a very project-based writer, so even though I may have an idea going into it, I may execute different versions of that idea. So like, for example, I knew as a good Cuban girl, I needed to write a poem for Los Balseros, right? That was a part of our history, and it's an elegy that I knew I could not write. Thankfully, that worked out on the first try, so I didn't have to touch it again. But there are other poems that I knew the idea was good, I knew that I was inspired by the content, or it felt like an important piece of historical context or personal context that needed to exist. And I just needed time to get at it from the right angle and to approach it with maturity or empathy or distance. Oftentimes a lot of distance in order to really see a thing more clearly is definitely the personal content there requires some distance. But there are very few poems that I wrote for the collection that felt complete, that didn't make it in. I would say maybe I cut, less than 10, I would say didn't make it in. But that's just, again, because I'm very stubborn. If I know I want to do something, I will keep trying to write anything for years until it satisfies me, or surprises me, rather, and then it has earned its way in. Yeah. Other thoughts or questions? I'm very open. You can ask me what I had for breakfast and I'll tell you. It was a croissant with raspberry jam and a side of fruit. I picked up the grapes, the strawberries, and the pineapple. Yes?
Could you expand on what you said about surprises you? Is that like really resonated?
Yeah, for sure. So surprise is everything to me in literature, but more specifically in poetry. And I often say if you can surprise yourself, you can surprise the reader. So when I teach students creative writing and poetry, I try to impart that to them. But I think the way I have conceptualized it is what's surprising to me is something that moves beyond the first circle of discovery. So for example, let's say you want to write about your mother's yellow dress. And you say, my mother's yellow dress is as yellow as a school bus. And you're like, okay, where else can we go? That's the first circle of discovery. How can we get a little bit stranger and a little bit further away from the first impulse? And I think the more you spend time meditating on interesting comparisons. That I think is where surprise exists. But you don't want to go so far out of discovery. You don't want to end up in like the 20th circle of discovery, and then you feel as though you've lost the plot a little bit. You get lost in the sauce, and you're like, well, wait a minute. This doesn't even feel like it exists in the same image system as the, original idea or the original image. But yeah, I think just kind of advancing your thinking, getting more comfortable, not settling on the first impulse imagistically or syntactically or formally. And I think too, maybe another way of looking at surprise is also discomfort. Like, can you make yourself uncomfortable on the page? That I think often leads to surprise. Do you want to know what I had for lunch?
Any more questions? Last question? Wonderful. Hello. So, last question. Something of a very college tradition that we try to ask all the visiting writers. So, if you would be so kind as to give your thoughts and opinions on Beyonce, that would be greatly appreciated.
Oh no. Uh-oh.
You can be honest, it's okay.
No, I don't know. How like is the beehive in here? Like, are they gonna come
I
see
think
me?
you'll be fine.
Okay, here's the thing. Do I respect Beyonce tremendously? Yes. I think she is the best performer of our time. I single-handedly believe that. However, I am not convinced that she is as involved in the creation of her image and in her music.
Finally, someone said it.
As she really is. Like, I don't want to pit women against each other, let alone like women of color in the arts. But I feel like when I think about Beyonce, I often have to think about Rihanna. And I think Beyonce is way more talented than Rihanna, but I believe that Rihanna is a part of everything she does. To me, there's a lot of heart and spirit in her work, and it feels like an extension of her. For me, when I think of Beyonce, I think that there's a team that's really leading the charge on how she's pushing boundaries. And I think that's by design, you know? I mean, she does far less interviews. She's definitely more reserved. We know far less about her personal life. So there's a distance there. And maybe that's what it is for me, is that I find it difficult to connect with her because it's always about perfection. In every era of Beyonce, it is just flat out perfection. And I'm interested in the flaws. I like a little bit more mess. So, again, I respect her a lot. And I have tons of her music, like on various playlists. But I'm just not 100% convinced that I know her. And I want to know her. I wish she would let me in, is what I'm saying. Call me, Beyonce. I know you're watching.
Well said.
Great answer.
Really? Okay, so that
Great
has the
answer, yes.
mustard that I was
Yeah.
I'm gonna be so scared to open Twitter tomorrow. And then you rat me out. Don't do it.